What's up guys, it's Justin here, and today I've got the review for you of the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus. So I've had these two devices for over a month now, and the reason why I waited so long to do my review is because there's a lot to it. This phone is very complex, it's very feature packed, so I felt like it was fair to just use this phone more and try to figure out what features were important and which ones I didn't exactly use, because there's definitely a lot of them, and I think Samsung has once again set a good standard for what to expect in phones this year when it comes to design, display, and camera, with a very solid offering here available in two different sizes. I'm also going to be giving away a Samsung Galaxy S8 soon, so make sure you subscribe to the channel, have your notifications on to be notified when I release that video, and also leave a thumbs up on this video, and I'll have details for that in the coming weeks. So just to get the specs out of the way, the model I have here has a Snapdragon 835 processor with an Adreno 540 GPU, 4GB of RAM, and 64GB of expandable storage. It also has Bluetooth 5.0, and on the Korean model you can expect an Exynos 8895 CPU. Top of the line specs are what you should expect out of a phone that costs this much, but there's much more to it, whether it's the display, the way it's built, the great camera, and overall it's a very complete package, and for the most part, just looking at it, I think this is a phone that will be great for years to come. In a lot of ways, it's a refined version of the Samsung Galaxy S7, which was a great phone in my opinion when it comes to the design, the performance, and everything. And it also has some traces of the Samsung Galaxy Note 7, and you guys know what happened to that, but I think this is a good combination of both elegance and performance. The display is probably one of the most prominent things you're going to notice when you first pick up this phone because it is absolutely beautiful. Samsung went by the slogan, unbox your phone, meaning to take out the boxes of the sides and just have a nice refined and curved edge design on the display, as you might have seen on the LG G6. Both phones have a same resolution display of 2960 by 1440, which is an 18.5 to 9 aspect ratio, which is around 2 to 1. The entire face of the phone is pretty much covered in screen at an 84% screen to body ratio, which also means you don't have touch capacitive buttons, but instead everything goes as close to the edge as possible, which is much more immersive in my opinion, and I've actually come to quite like it. The PPI is 570 on the Samsung Galaxy S8 and 529 on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus. And with that difference, there's really no actual difference because either way, these displays are extremely sharp and you're not going to be able to distinguish or complain about the quality of either one. The colors are saturated as you should expect out of a Super AMOLED, and the contrast is good, crazy deep blacks, and I think it looks great. Another thing is these screens get super bright at over 1000 nits, and if you get to the highest brightness setting, it actually gives you a warning as to the fact that it might damage your eyes if you're going to be using it at that for an extended period of time. For the most part, I never had to use the brightest setting unless I was outside on a sunny day where it's hard to see the screen, and that definitely comes in handy. The 18:9 is definitely an advantage when it comes to multitasking and having a similar size square window on both sides, and overall for apps where you're scrolling such as on Twitter and Facebook, I just love to have more screen real estate and view more within one screen. Almost all of the apps I use have no problem whatsoever with the larger display, but you do have the option to customize the scaling within the settings. When it comes to disadvantages with this display though, I will say that it does make it slightly harder to type, especially along the edges. I found myself accidentally pressing buttons at times, and that the curve just simply isn't for everyone. And this year, Samsung does not offer a flat model of the Samsung Galaxy's flagship variant, as opposed to last year where you had the option between the S7 and the S7 Edge. Another small thing that was mentioned was the inconsistencies in the color temperature between different devices. So I've got a Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus and an S8 in front of me, and I noticed that the S8 has a bit of a red tint to it. Samsung is releasing updates to fix this problem as best as they can through software, but there is also the option to customize the color balance in the settings, but I thought it was worth mentioning anyways. When discussing displays though, this is the best one that I've ever used, and I personally really enjoy having more screen real estate since I use Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram and apps like that a lot. For watching YouTube videos, you might notice some black bars on each side initially because standard videos are 16:9 or 21:9, but there is also a built-in option that lets you scale it to fill up the entire screen completely, which looks really good. On the screen, you're also going to find a square that I can describe as 3D touch, but as a home button on the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus. It is pressure sensitive and gives you a vibration feedback when you press it. You also have an always-on display that has some useful information that is shown at all times, and this doesn't take up much battery life at all because of the Super AMOLED. By default, it displays the date, the time, the battery life, and just some basic notifications, but you do have the option to customize that to a degree. So now moving on to the feel and look. So I have the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus and the Samsung Galaxy S8 in front of me. Being someone who has used the iPhone 7 Plus for the past few months, I thought that the S8 Plus was going to be my phone. And just from using both of them, I can tell you that the Samsung Galaxy S8 is the perfect size in my opinion, because you're still getting a huge screen because of the 84% screen to body ratio, but at the same time, it's very manageable and still relatively usable with one hand. The S8 Plus was simply too big and I felt like I was going to drop it a lot of times. The phone follows the same design intentions as Samsung has done in their recent devices, including a glass front and back, which is Gorilla Glass 5, and is available in a couple different colors, but in my opinion, the black looks the best. It just looks very sharp and seamless with the entire black front and sides. Even after having the phone for an entire month, I still stop and admire the design once in a while, but with that being said, it feels very delicate and it does scratch easier than I would have liked. Even though there are just surface scratches on the screen from having it in my pocket with my keys or wallet, it's still noticeable, and you're definitely going to want to at least get something like a dbrand skin on the back to protect your phone, and I'll leave a link in the description section if you would like to check that out. In case skins are your thing though, and you don't mind adding some bulk to your phone, I also did a video outlining my top 5 picks for cases for the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus. When it comes to the buttons, ports, and sensor placement, you have your volume rockers located on the left side, the sleep wake on the right side, your headphone jack on the bottom alongside a USB-C port along with a single speaker. Of course, you also can't forget about the Bixby button that is found below the volume rockers, and I think for the most part, we really don't like that. I personally felt like the volume rocker should have been placed where the Bixby button is because the volume rocker is quite high up and a little bit hard to reach, especially on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus. But the fact that you can't remap it out of the box and it only goes to Samsung's new personal assistant Bixby is pretty annoying to say the least, but here's just a workaround as to how to map the Bixby button for anything. Something else to complain about is the fingerprint sensor being located on the back and next to the camera. First off, it's located pretty high up, but in addition to that, it's found on one side as opposed to in the middle, so depending on which hand you primarily use your phone, it might be a bit hard to reach at times. People are also wary about the fact that the camera is found right next to it, meaning you might smudge your camera and it will ruin your photos when you go to take a photo next. But I can tell you that the oleophobic coating on the camera sensor is very good, and it kind of wicks away fingerprints quite nicely, but I don't know why Samsung could have just put it anywhere else. Aside from the replacement though, the sensor itself is fast as you should expect it. You also have the option to use an iris scanner found on the front-facing camera to unlock the phone, but it's personally something that I don't use. I like to just use the fingerprint sensor or just a pin. Just to wrap everything that is great about the design up though, you also have an IP68 rating, so you can have this in the water up to 1.5 meters for 30 minutes. I think when it comes to design, you really can't complain about anything in the phone itself. It's beautiful, it has metal sides, it has a Gorilla Glass front and back, it's nicely curved, the display takes up most of the screen, which is nice and seamless. But with that being said, the utility aspect is something that should be considered because a phone is something that you're going to take around with you every day, and everyone treats your phone a bit differently. And I feel like the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus, for someone like me who just wants to use a phone as an everyday phone, is a bit too delicate, and I feel like it's going to break or scratch, and I'm a bit worried, especially with such a beautiful phone. So that's just something you might want to keep in mind. Moving on to software experience, you can expect a lot out of this. I think Samsung has put a lot of time into trying to add new features and refine TouchWiz as opposed to trying to simplify it. With the flagship specs of a Snapdragon 835 processor, you're going to get insane performance whether you're gaming, you're doing your everyday tasks, multitasking, and I didn't notice any issues whatsoever. This phone is very fast. With Samsung's TouchWiz on top of Android 7.0 though, it's never been my favorite skin because I'm a stock Android kind of guy, but I can tell you that Samsung has made some good improvements to this, and for the most part clean up the whole experience to make it more pleasant. If you're a Samsung user, it's not going to be a huge difference as to what you should expect from before. The notification tab, the settings, the way the home screen is laid out is pretty similar for the most part and still gives you a lot of customization. If TouchWiz isn't your cup of tea though, you can also just install a launcher like Nova Launcher, which is pretty popular, especially on Samsung phones. Bixby definitely has some cool features in being very integrated within the ecosystem, and I don't think you guys want me to go in depth as to everything it can and should do. And some of it is still in beta, but one of the features is within the camera where you're able to just have it scan an item or a piece of packaging and it'll try to find it online for you and just try to bring relevant information into your everyday usage of a phone and what's around you. There's without a doubt a few good uses for Bixby, and I can find it useful in many situations, but for the most part, I think with Google Assistant and what it's done in the past few years, especially recently, it would have made complete sense just to continue on with that. But But now moving on to the camera, and in just the past few years, whether it was the Samsung Galaxy S4 all the way up to the S8 Plus and S8 now, Samsung is probably the most consistent Android smartphone maker in terms of their camera. I'm glad to tell you that once again they've done it here with the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus, but I would have liked to see them be more ambitious in possibly going with a dual camera layout. We're probably gonna have to wait until the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 or the next generation flagship for that, but I would have liked to see something like a 2x zoom, a super wide camera, or even both in a Samsung phone, because just off what they're able to do and what they're capable of with their standard built-in cameras, it would be really impressive. There isn't much change in the camera this year, and there didn't have to be, just some small refinements as to what we saw on the Samsung Galaxy Note 7 and the S7 and S7 Edge, and it's a 12 megapixel f1.7 sensor with a 26mm lens, optical image stabilization. The front-facing camera is an 8 megapixel f1.7 shooter with the ability to record 2K at 30 frames per second, so that makes it great for vlogging. When looking at the image quality, you're going to expect it to have a Samsung characteristic. It's going to be quite saturated, the pictures have a nice punch to it, and for the most part, for out of camera and just for social media sharing, it looks amazing. But if you're someone who wants to color correct your images or add filters to it like I do, then it might be a bit too much in terms of the processing right off taking the shot. The images are sharp though, the autofocus was fast, and it was relatively consistent from my testing, and the dynamic range was definitely there. It did a good job in measuring the exposure, and white balance for the most part was quite accurate while leaning a bit to a cooler tone. When it came to low light images though, it looked really good with a built-in flash, and the noise removal in this situation works nicely. Moving on to the front-facing camera, the fact that it has autofocus is great because actually most smartphones don't have autofocus on the front-facing camera. It's a bit soft and blends in the skin tones a bit too much, but for the most part, it looks really good. As for 4K video recording, it's sharp, it looks great, and once again, the colors are nicely saturated, they have a punch to it. But one thing that I do have to complain about is the optical image stabilization just having a bit of a jello effect, which was something that I noticed in the previous versions of Samsung's phones, including the Note 7 and the S7. And it still seems to be a bit present in this generation. But with that being said, just to wrap up the camera experience as a whole, the one that you're going to find on the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus is probably one of the best up there in terms of Android smartphones that you can currently buy. So with all these great things that I've said about this phone when it comes to the power, the beautiful display, just the overall experience that it's able to offer, and a great camera, of course you're going to wonder, how is the battery life? Because if you can't use the phone halfway through the day, then everything kind of just goes out of the window at that point, even though that's a very simple aspect but very crucial one when it comes to buying a smartphone. This is the first major phone that Samsung has released after the whole Note 7 issue, and I can tell you that if you're skeptical, you shouldn't be. I think they've definitely learned their lesson, and now each phone and its battery goes through a whole complex stage of testing, and for the most part, the phone has been out for a month now and there hasn't been any reported issues, and I don't think there's going to be any problems there. The batteries have also been improved as well, and Samsung claims that after 2 years of having the phone, they still retain a 95% capacity efficiency, because with lithium-ion batteries, the full capacity starts to decrease over time as the device becomes charged more and more. So I'm not able to test that, so we're gonna have to see in 2 years if that's actually true. From my experiences though, I was able to get about 5 hours of screen on time on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus and 4 hours on the Samsung Galaxy S8, and there is also an optimized battery mode that gives you some flexibility when it comes to saving the power. You also have Quick Charge 3.0, so you get 0 to 100 charge in under 2 hours. The Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus is also wireless charging compatible, but it isn't going to charge as fast as opposed to a wired, of course. That's what the speakers sound like, and they're loud but just not that clear, and it doesn't seem to be a category that Samsung is really putting much attention to. What they've sort of done to make up for that though is include a set of allegedly $100 AKG earbuds, which sound pretty good in my opinion. Additionally, a feature that I do like about this phone though is the Bluetooth 5.0 integration, which essentially allows you to stream your music or audio to 2 Bluetooth audio devices. So now time for my final thoughts of the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus. So I've tried to use these phones as evenly as possible, and I can tell you that the S8 Plus is a great phone for multimedia, and both of them are still great for multimedia because the display on the S8 is still pretty big. With that being said though, as an everyday utility phone, I would personally go with the Samsung Galaxy S8 because it just feels so much more comfortable in the hand, and the usability and just being able to hold it is so much more enjoyable than having to carry this big phone. I think Samsung has definitely nailed it when it came to design, with exception to the fingerprint sensor placement and also the volume rocker, which is just something I prefer. The display is probably the best that you're going to find on the market, with exception to the personal preference as to whether you like a curved screen or not, because you really don't have an option there. The software experience overall was pretty good, but you do have the option to customize that. And when it comes to the camera, I really would have liked to see Samsung jump into a dual camera layout. I think they would have done a great job with that, especially with what they've done in their main cameras. Battery life was also great, and for the most part, I can definitely recommend these phones, but with that being said, you're going to want to go ahead and try it and see if it's the phone for you. If you also want to know how these stack up between other phones, I also did a comparison between the new LG G6 and also the Apple iPhone 7 Plus. But I think this is going to be a great year for smartphones, and I think Samsung has set the bar in a number of categories here, and I'm very excited to see what comes out throughout the year. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and I'll see you guys in the next one.